So why is all this so important now Martin Bashir has been exposed, named and shamed? Let's move on. Well, we could, if you're prepared to believe he acted alone and without anyone else's knowledge. The BBC is certainly hoping you will. Hi, and thank you so much for joining me. Well, the true story of one of the biggest scandals in public life and indeed in broadcasting is going to be released November of this year, and it will reveal a cover-up of staggering proportion. The BBC is going to face fresh scrutiny over Martin Bashir's Panorama interview with Princess Diana. Now, Martin Bashir's deceit was uncovered by the author Andy Webb in his book Dianarama, and as a consequence, he went on to force the BBC to release 10,000 pages of documents relating to that scandal. And what is probably more damning, their great attempts to cover it up. Now, history has taught us it's often the cover-up that can lead to more serious consequences than actually the original, I was going to say crime, but I won't. For legal reasons, I'll say event. So in this lengthy legal battle between Andy Webb and the BBC, which was conducted under freedom of information laws, it forced the release of material, and pardon the cliche, that has never been seen before. But in this case, that's not hyperbole. It's actually fact. Now, Andy Webb has spent 30 years investigating this story, and I'm confident that we'll finally be told the true story of what happened to Diana via his book, which has been described as a radical reappraisal of this major historical event. Let's face it, we can't underestimate its profound impact on the monarchy itself. Now, Andy Webb made a TV documentary in 2020 that revealed answers to many of the questions that those closest to Diana were actually seeking. And it's his brave and determined battle to force the release of documents that the BBC were determined to hide that makes me really want to highlight this work. It takes a thick skin, and such a fight often has huge financial and personal cost, as we know from Andrew Loney's own experience with the Mountbatten archives. Andy Webb told what it was like to fight this giant entity that was the BBC in a Times article published in January 2024, saying it is by turns, and I quote, slippery, arrogant, duplicitous, and it has deep pockets. When it comes to hiring legal muscle, reportedly they spent to the tune of over £600,000 on legal representation to fight him. Initially, Webb received a heavily redacted report from the BBC that claimed falsely that Charles Spencer was part of the conspiracy to manipulate Diana with forged bank statements. It's important to note that the head of news at the BBC, Tony Hall, described Martin Bashir as honest and honourable. After Webb's documentary, Diana, the Truth Behind the Interview, the BBC commissioned an investigation into itself, and Lord Dyson, a former Supreme Court judge, found that they had indeed covered up what they knew about Bashir's deceit. Now, just before Andy Webb's documentary was due to go to air, he was sent a secret internal report that claimed that Bashir had not acted alone. It claimed falsely, and I must emphasise that, it claimed falsely, that Bashir had been supplied with raw material for his forgeries by Diana's brother Charles. Now, luckily, after his own inquiries, Andy Webb dismissed this. However, if he'd been swayed off his path, if he'd swallowed that hook, line and sinker, the documentary wouldn't have been aired, and presumably Bashir would still be there as editor of BBC Religion. It's curious, isn't it, that the BBC was so eager to be so transparent with a document that effectively cleared Bashir, and they were happy to throw Diana's brother under the bus. And Webb later found that there were other documents found at the same time that concurred with Lord Dyson's findings, that the BBC had covered up deceitful behaviour by Bashir, but they weren't so forthcoming with those. Now, Bashir resigned a few days before this was made public. However, further discoveries by Webb indicated that Bashir actually tried to play the race card in his defence. I don't think we're allowed to say that anymore, but I'm just actually quoting a Times report. Evidently, he blamed race and class discrimination for the scandal rather than take accountability for his own actions. So why is all this so important now Martin Bashir has been exposed, named and shamed? Let's move on. Well, we could, if you're prepared to believe he acted alone and without anyone else's knowledge. The BBC is certainly hoping you will. Andy Webb is keen to expose nefarious activity by those at the most senior levels of BBC management, with the chilling addition that it's still going on today. He makes the point that scandals on the BBC have had their fair share of airtime and many fade over time, but this one had huge implications on the future of the monarchy. It's accepted now that the Panorama interview was a decisive turning point in Charles and Diana's relationship, leading to their formal divorce proceedings, and ensured that Diana would never become queen. So it could be argued that it changed the course of history. A turning point that the powerful BBC threw its full weight behind to cover up. Now, consequences for the BBC so far have included a public apology, and they've claimed that they've since implemented stronger editorial controls. But editorial controls wouldn't have deterred those who colluded with Bashir to contrive and cover up this massive deception, or their determination for it actually to go ahead. They had to pay a settlement to Alan Waller, a former employee of Diana's brother, paying him damages for the false information included in the fabricated documents. Their reputation was tarnished, with even Prince William himself accusing them of a whitewash and failing to investigate properly. He said it fueled his mother's fear, her paranoia and isolation, and it worsened his parents' relationship. And I think he was spot on and very brave to express that. He also expressed his indescribable sadness at the corporation's failings, which he said contributed significantly to his mother's state of mind in her final years. He then went on to outline the findings of Lord Dyson's report. Now, that report found that those responsible for this deception lied and used fake documents to obtain an interview with his mother. They made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled her justifiable paranoia. She had nowhere to turn and seemingly no one to trust. They displayed a woeful incompetence when investigating complaints. How many times have we heard that now? And how many times have we heard about investigations into specific complaints about that program? Now, they were very evasive in their reporting to the media, and they did try to cover everything up, what they knew from their own internal investigation. It was Prince William's view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what his mother said in that interview. He concluded that she was not only failed by a rogue reporter, but by leaders at the BBC who looked the other way and failed to ask the tough questions. I'm sure that Prince William would love to see them exposed and held accountable. So maybe this book, Dianarama, will get the ball rolling. As the author points out, whenever there are questions to answer, the story remains alive. Dianarama will be out in November of this year. Deception, Entrapment, Cover-Up. The Betrayal of Princess Diana. Now, I hope to have the opportunity to speak to Andy Webb about his book on the Vintage Read Show when it comes out later this year. It's available for pre-order, and I'll leave links in the description box below. I certainly have already ordered it. Thank you very much. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.